Oh, and thank you for joining us. I am Rebecca E. Treasure, the managing editor of Apex Magazine and project manager at Apex Book Company. We're here to celebrate the release of Resurrections by Ada Hoffmann, which will actually release December 19th. You can pre-order it now, and that should be linked in the comments here on YouTube. Ada Hoffmann is the author of the Outside Space Opera trilogy, the collection Monsters in My Mind and Million Year Elegies, and dozens of speculative short stories and poems. Ada's work has been a finalist for the Philip K. Dick Award, the Compton Crook Award, and the WSFA Small Press Award. Ada was diagnosed with autism at the age of 13 and is passionate about autistic self-advocacy. Their Autistic Book Party review series is devoted to in-depth discussions of autism representation in speculative fiction. Much of their work also features autistic characters. Ada is an adjunct professor of computer science at a major Canadian university, and they did their PhD thesis in 2018 on teaching computers to write poetry. They're a former semi-professional soprano, tabletop gaming enthusiast, and LARPer. They live in Eastern Ontario. Hi, Ada. Thank you so much for coming.
Hello, it's so great to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. So tell us about Resurrections. Tell us about this collection.
All right, so Resurrections is my it's my second short story collection, or if you count all kinds of collections, then it's my third. It contains short stories and poetry from ranging from stuff from the beginning of my short story career to a few pieces that are new to this collection. And it's all themed around the idea of descending to the underworld and then coming back out again.
So you spoke in an interview recently about the emotional journey that you wanted to take readers on throughout the course of that collection. It was a really interesting answer, and I was hoping that you could repeat some of that for us here because it was really a good insight into the way the collection is structured.
Yes, thank you. So I like to give my collections a theme, and not always like a really overt theme, but kind of an emotional theme or a subtle theme. Um, so for Monsters in My Mind, my first collection, the theme was like being different from other people. And for Resurrections, as I said, the theme is underworlds. And I came up with this because I was starting to think about making a second collection. And the first thing I knew about this collection was the stories that I wanted to put first and last. You know, those are really important slots in a collection. I knew I wanted the first story to be variations on a theme from Turandot, which is this very timey-wimey piece of metafiction about an opera. And I wanted the last story to be I Sing Against the Silent Sun, which is a story I co-wrote with my friend Murph and Wolfmore. And so I was asking myself, how do we link these two stories together, the first and last one? How do we make a through line between them? So in Variations on a Theme from Turandot, the big thing that's going on is this character in the opera who dies in the opera every time it's performed is starting to kind of wake up to what's going on and to realize she's in this time loop where she dies over and over again because it's an opera, and to start thinking, well, what do I want to do about that? And then meanwhile, Silent Sun at the end, this is the story of a character who's kind of already been through all of this terrible stuff. They're a dissident in this big space opera universe who's been captured and silenced, and who ends up finding their voice again and, you know, kind of saving the day with it. And so the through line that I saw was, you know, from starting to descend into this world where you realize like that there's death and there's bad things, and you're only just realizing it, to this place where you come out the other side. And I was like, okay, that's my through line, just kind of in and back out again. So I have the collection split into a few sections based on this theme. So there's a first section which is all about descents, you know, and it can be literal descents, or it can be, you know, realizing something that you didn't want to acknowledge, or it can be a descent into madness, you know, it can be all kinds of descents. then I have the second section, which is kind of based for me on the idea of Holy Saturday. You know, just the idea that you've gone down into this underworld and now you're kind of stuck there for a while, but there's also other people there and you're trying to help them, but maybe in kind of this misguided way or this way that doesn't really get you out of it immediately. And I had a lot of kind of relationship experiences of my own that kind of went into that section of stories. Then there's a little tiny third section, which is kind of just these little moments of a little more lightness after that section, or moments of like suddenly realizing something that is actually going to get you out into a place where you're making more progress. And then there's the final section, which is, of course, coming back out of the underworld again. So in these stories in the last section, you know, sometimes things are still quite grim, but there's progress, there's victory, there's escape in these final stories. So that's kind of, I was just really interested in almost making a meta story, you know,
Yeah.
that progresses through to different stories. And that's always what I like to do when I'm making a collection.
And and so was that an easy process to you were like, this story will go here and this story will go here and this poem bridges those, or was this something that took a lot of time and, you know, interrogation of the stories to discover?
So it took a little bit of trial and error. It didn't take a huge amount. I kind of started by making a list of all the stories that I was thinking of including and just jotting down, like, what does this story have to do with the theme of underworlds? And some stories, they just don't have anything to do with that theme. So you're like, all right, you're not in this connection. And then once you write down what each story has to do with the theme, you can kind of rearrange them into something that looks like a pleasing trajectory. And so when I do that, the first pass, when I do that, I just do it like in a text file, just writing down the names of the stories and moving them around until they look like they're in the right order. And then I actually make a file of them, like a manuscript file with the text of all the stories in them. And I read through it. And this happened in both of the collections. I'll read through it at that point. I'm like, okay, this mostly works, but like this doesn't work. Like this transition doesn't work. I got to move this story over here. I got to fix that. And it's really a lot like making a playlist, actually. Like when I make a playlist on
Yeah.
Spotify, I listen to it a few times, and I'm really sensitive to like the order that the songs go in. So it's very similar to that, making a collection.
That's a great way to put it. I love that. I wanted to ask, I noticed that there's a lot of oceanic themed pieces throughout the collection. And even like within the stories that seems to be kind of a touchstone in some way. What is your connection to the sea?
So that's a really interesting question, you know, because I didn't actually grow up by the sea or anything like that. I don't live by the sea now. I've visited different oceans or different seas a few times. And in fact, I was in Spain. I got to see the Mediterranean Sea, and that was very exciting. But I do live on the shores of Lake Ontario, which is this
Okay.
big lake.
Yeah.
Um, and I've always felt, I think this is the case for a lot of people, that just being near some kind of big body of water is just very nice, very soothing almost, like it feels right. And I think there's just so much in the sea as a metaphor. You know, water is a metaphor. It represents emotions. It represents being able to flow with something, or it represents, you know, going down to the depths. Like there's all kinds of different things you can do with the ocean as a symbol or as a metaphor. And I guess I really resonate with that because I do keep coming back to it.
Yeah. What about dinosaurs? Because that was, there's the story, but then the Dunkleosteus is kind of like bridges that. And I wanted to ask, like, well, where did that love? I mean, everybody loves dinosaurs, but where did that love
Everybody
come
loves
from?
dinosaurs. I loved
Yeah.
dinosaurs when I was a kid. And one of my other collections, Million Years Elegies, is actually a collection specifically of poems about dinosaurs.
Oh,
um,
wow.
but yeah, the Dunkleosteus actually wasn't written for that collection in the first place. It was written earlier. And if for those of you who don't know, a Dunkleosteus is not a dinosaur, but it is what's called a placoderm, which is an ancient fish, even older than the dinosaurs. But it's this really badass fish. It's like covered in armor. It's got these giant, you know, chomping jaws. It's got this really like fearsome armor base, that gets preserved in the fossils, and so I really like pocket arms. And so I thought about putting Nucleosteus into Million Year Elegies, but just didn't really fit thematically with the other poems because it hadn't been written for that collection in the first place. So I put it here instead. I'm like, here's a little poem. I still like this one. It just doesn't fit
Yeah.
anything
No,
else.
I enjoyed it. Yeah, very much. So another theme that I noticed when I was reading through it was that relationships that kind of make sense from the inside of the relationship, but that maybe break or violate some kind of convention in the story world was kind
Hmm.
of a repeated theme that I felt. And it made me wonder, like, what was your hope for readers to take away from these stories and the whole collection of these stories in regards to their own relationships and the way that they interact with each other in the world?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I feel like there's different ways in which a story can, teach a lesson, and not all of those ways are bad. I'm not like stories shouldn't have lessons, but I don't
Yeah,
want to ever come across as being like, oh, I write this story and the story is telling you what you should do in your life. Like
yeah,
I'm giving you instructions that way. Like even when the story is like phrased as instructions as a literary technique, I still don't literally mean it as like you the reader should go out and do this. That's
yeah.
not what I mean. But I think in terms of what I want readers to take away, I think what I keep coming back to when I think about this section is that, people get into these relationships that, are maybe not a good idea, or maybe sometimes they are a good idea from a certain perspective, but they're not going to be approved of, or they're not going to have an easy time. Or sometimes it really is like, yeah, no, that was a bad idea in retrospect. But either way, I mean, the thing about relationships like these is people don't get into them because they're stupid, because
Yeah.
they're purposely making bad choices. People get into them often because of good qualities. Often they get into them because they feel compassion for someone. They wanna help someone. They feel a connection of some kind that does have something valuable in it, even if the surrounding situation is not such a good idea. And so I just really, I don't know. I
I
guess
mean,
I just,
relationships are complicated. So,
yeah, TLDR,
yeah,
relationships are complicated. Yeah, but
yeah.
I think in terms of the takeaway, I hope people are just able to come to that section with compassion. That's all.
I loved the relationship stories.
Okay, that's good.
All of them. No, I really enjoyed those. Um, the another part of this that I really enjoyed were the poems about nightmares and almost dreams in some of the poems felt. And I wanted to ask what your process is for, I think a lot of writers have woken up with an idea in their head and wanted to write it down, but how do you go about that? Do you sit with it? Do you write it down as quickly as you can? Like, what is your process for turning these, subconscious things into something concrete?
That's a really good question. So, quite a few years ago, I tried doing this little project, and it was called the Nightmare Project. And the project was literally just that if I had a really weird, freaky dream, I would wake up and I would like jot it down, and then I would like turn that into a poem. And I got a few poems out of that. I had the first one appeared in Monsters in My Mind, and then there are two more of them in here. And but after about 4 or 5 or 6 of them, I kind of stopped doing that because I realized that most dreams actually don't make good poems. Um, because either they're so disjointed that you just can't
Mm.
even write them down in a way that conveys anything, or else they're the reverse and they're this completely mundane stuff. Like no one wants to see a poem where, oh, I'm at school and I forgot that I had a test today, and also where are my pants? Like everyone, like
Right.
there's not really a lot of new insight to be mined from that, and so I didn't end up sticking with that project for very long. But there's also the poem Dream Logic, and this poem comes from a very specific place. This poem was written specifically for the anthology Climbing Lightly Through Forests, which is an anthology of poetry written in memory of Ursula K. Le Guin. And my friend R.B. Lemberg was editing that collection, and they specifically asked me to write that poem. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm the right person for this. I mean, obviously Ursula Le Guin was like great, but I don't know if I'm like a person with enough of a connection to her, like to be the person you want to hear from in this project. And so RB talked to me about that. They're like, no, I feel like the collection is missing your voice. And I'm like, okay. And they suggested that I should reread a book that I had read first in high school, which was called The Lathe of Heaven. And what's going on in this book is that this person is having dreams that come true in real life. Like his dreams actually change reality. And then he runs into this kind of unscrupulous psychiatrist who tries to like harness that ability to change the world on purpose. And of course, that doesn't go very well for either of them. And so I didn't really get a lot out of that book when I read it in high school. But when I read it again, I was like, oh, I was like, okay, because as an adult, a lot of the themes in this book, like power imbalances and that
Yeah.
kind of thing, had become things that were really resonant for me. So I was like, okay, I actually do have something to say about this. Like Arby was right. And so I wrote it, and it's in the collection now. And now it's in this one as well.
That's awesome. I love being able to revisit something that you kind of bounced off of in high school or, in
Yes.
those lit classes you had or college, and then it means something to you and you're like, oh, that's why it was in the curriculum.
Yes.
Now it
Well, it
makes
wasn't even
sense.
the curriculum. I just happened to read it, but yes.
Right. Yeah. So you say in the story notes, you identify which story is your least favorite of the
Mhm.
collection. And I wanted to ask, what is your favorite story in the collection? Which I know is like asking people to choose like a favorite child, but like if you can, what's
I
your favorite?
understand, but I think if I have to choose, then my favorite is the very first one. It is
Mm,
variations on a theme from Turandot. I'm just really proud of that story because I guess so much research went into it, and so much thinking went into it, and so much emotion went into it, and I was able to do all this cool like structural experimenting, which is always really fun to do when I feel like I can get it right. I went through so many revisions because I was, every time I would send it to a beta reader, they're like, what about that and that? And I had to add those things to the story as
yeah.
well. And I really, really enjoy where it ended up. And I think it ended up in a year's best American science fiction anthology, actually. And so I'm very, very proud of what that story ended up being.
It was you also say that that one took a ton of work.
Yes,
It was a
it was a
really
labor
long
of love.
process. So, does that feed in, do you think, to being your favorite, that like you poured so much time and energy into creating this? Because it's a triumphant story. I really loved it, but
Well, thank you. I think it can go either way when you spend,
yeah.
an exceptional amount of work on a story. It either ends up being a triumph like that one, or it ends up being like the one that I said was my least favorite, where it's like, I, you gave me so much trouble. You caused so much trouble for me. I'm
Right.
still mad at you.
I will say that the one that you said was your least favorite, I was my favorite ending. I don't know if I could pick a favorite of the piece of the collection, but the way that one ended, I was like, oh, of course. And I thought it came
I'm
together
glad.
so beautifully.
And I
So,
mean, there's a reason why I put that one in the collection despite
right.
being bad. And it's because a lot of readers did resonate with that one. And in fact, it's
Mm,
a story that was nominated for the WSFA Small Press Award. So I was like,
yeah.
okay, well, clearly there's something valuable going on here,
Right.
even if I'm still mad about it.
Absolutely. So speaking of the process and how much time and effort sometimes goes into these things, you said that you wrote some of these stories a very long time ago. One of these was your first ever published piece, I think, and then some more recently.
Not my first.
Not your first. Okay.
My very first went into monsters in my mind, but
Okay.
my very second and third
Okay.
um, are in here. And that's just
And
because they didn't fit with the theme of monsters in my mind. So, saving for
right.
later. Mhm.
But I wanted to ask how your process has changed over the years, and more, maybe more than like the technical process of creation, but
Mhm.
how you're trying to tell stories or what you're trying to tell stories about. How has that changed? And do you look back at those older stories and see that, or were you on a different path? And how has that changed over the years?
My process has changed a lot. And um, I mean, if I can ramble about my life in a
Absolutely.
self-indulgent way, the two biggest things that changed my process were actually like mental health things. Like I had a very big mental health breakdown in 2014. And I also had, in like 2018, 19, I had kind of a burnout, which was, I had just finished, defending my PhD thesis, and everyone's a little burnt out after that. Plus, I was in a living situation that wasn't the best for me. And so these two incidents both really changed my relationship to my writing. Before, like in 2012, 2013, I was writing short stories really really prolifically, and just like, any off the wall idea, like I could, okay, let's see if this is a story. And that was very easy. And after 2014, it was no longer easy. And I could not do that anymore. But I still had the drive, or the feeling that writing is a thing I need to do, a thing that's really important to me, but it didn't come easily the way it had before. And the only way I could really keep myself doing it or keep any ideas coming was to get a lot more personal, really, with the stories, like to really kind of delve in and go, what am I really, really feeling right now that I can
Yeah.
make a story out of? Like I couldn't just bounce ideas off the wall anymore. I had to go very far inward for them. Um, and my burnout in 2018, 2019 changed my process in kind of a very similar way. And what that one did was I actually, for a long time after that, writing anything like original, like for publication, was very hard. But at the same time, I developed a really, really intense habit of fan fiction, actually, which I am not connecting to my author identity at all. But I spent a few years just like, okay, I will write original fiction if I'm under contract, but the writing that actually makes me feel good is like this other stuff. And I was just like, okay, that's where I am right now. And it's really only finally like this year, really, or like maybe the tail end of last year, that I've come back to a place where my mental health is good enough that I am getting ideas I really love and ideas I have the energy to work on in original fiction again. But I think what I learned from my time in the fanfic mines is that what's really important to me now is pursuing the ideas that, the ideas that really speak to me, the ideas that really excite me, even if there's something that I think like, oh no, this is too self-indulgent, or people are, not going to like this, or I have to do those ones anyway. I have to actually be true to myself in that way, which is something that it's very easy. It's easier to do sometimes in fan fiction, right? There's more of a culture for that. And I realized, um, and I realized this quality that fan fiction had was the reason why fan fiction was helping me so much. And I had to find a way to translate that to original fiction as well. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I said, that is a very long ramble about my life.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I think that fan fiction can be a great way to release those creative things when we don't feel like creating, right? Like we don't want
Yes.
to come up with a world and characters, but we still have these stories that we want to tell. And so I think
Yes.
it's beautiful for that. I'm really glad that you're finding some of that energy back. That's
Yes.
wonderful to hear too. But yeah,
I've
I
made
think
a
fan
lot of
fiction's
positive
great.
changes in my life, but it's been a process.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we have time for one more quick question and then we're going to go into the reading.
Okay.
Um, I asked our Discord if they had any questions, and I wanted to ask this about the you didn't get to see this one beforehand, so I'm sorry for the surprise
Oh,
question.
well then. All right.
This is from all of the stories, this was an interesting question, which was the hardest to place, or that took the longest to find the right home, or the longest to get right, in order to like get it to the editor that you were under contract with? Was there one that was like particularly difficult to work on,
Okay, so not the hardest to write, but the hardest to
to
sell.
place? Yeah, to
Okay,
sell.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. Let me see if I can even remember, because I don't always even remember
I know there's a
um,
lot of stories
the
too in
sales
poems.
process. Like
Yeah.
once I publish it, I'm just like, whatever, it's published now.
Yeah.
But I actually have the table of contents here in front of me, so I'm just scanning through it. Um, I think honestly, one of the hardest to sell was variations on a theme from Turandot. Like I mentioned that one already.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I went so many rewrites on that one was because I was trying to send it to different markets, and they were all like, "Oh, this is almost there, but not quite. Like we want this and this and it and
Yeah.
stuff." And I was like, ah. And with Strange Horizons in particular, which is the place that eventually published it, but I went, it must have been 3 or 4 rounds with this same editor who kept sending me rewrite requests. She
Yeah.
was like, okay, this is good. I like where it's going, but like, what about this character? And what about that character? And what about this? And I was like, oh, okay. And I had to just keep adding things or changing how I was looking at things, or in some cases, like letting go of things that
Sure.
were not actually useful to the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I almost, it was so many rewrites, it almost feels like me and that editor were like collaborating on the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Which can be an amazing feeling.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah.
I love book writing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a great opener to the collection. The whole collection is great. Which story did you select to read for us today?
Well, I looked at the length that you wanted the reading to be, and actually I was having trouble finding a story of that length, that I felt I could do a good job reading. And so what I decided to do is I'm going to read 3 short pieces,
Okay.
if that's okay, that all kind of add
Perfect.
up to that amount. So I'm going to be reading
Absolutely.
a poem and 2 pieces of flash fiction. I don't know what flash fiction is. Um, so to begin with, I'm going to read the first poem in the collection, which is called How I Knew My Professor Was a Fairy in Disguise. One timbit nibble, and the classroom changed. The clock crawled while we grew old, loved, died. At the bell, we gathered our grandchildren, pushed past the darkening door, and turned to dust. Second, I'm going to be reading a piece of flash fiction called Jenny's House. So this is an earlier one. Now, content warning: there is children in peril in this story, but nothing super graphic. For show and tell today, I brought a GI Joe covered with slime from the slime monster in Jenny's basement. You can see how it's green and gooey, and light goes right through it. And if you squeeze the Ziploc bag, it moves like this: swish. I'm not going to open the bag because it smells bad. It smelled worse at Jenny's house. I was over there playing GI Joes with Jenny, and the whole house smelled awful. And I held my nose and I said, "Pee, you." And Jenny said, "Sorry, that's the slime monster. We can't clean it up." I told Jenny I wanted to see the slime monster because slime monsters are awesome and you guys would want to hear about it. But Jenny said, "No, it's dangerous." I said, "If it's so dangerous, why do you live here? Can't you move somewhere else?" And Jenny said, "Mom doesn't want to. A man came in trying to steal the TV and it ate him. So Mom says it's safer to stay." I said, "That's cool. Even if it smells bad, it's a Bender man." So we tried to play with GI Joes, but everything smelled bad. I said, "All my GI Joes are going to stink when I bring them home." And Jenny said, "Sorry." When she talked about the slime monster, her face got all screwed up and nervous, like this. I said, "Did the slime monster ever try to eat you?" And Jenny said, "I don't want to talk about it. Let's just play GI Joes." Jenny made her GI Joe fall off a cliff and land on a lion, so he survived. But then the lion ate him up, and I laughed and laughed. And Jenny's face got all screwed up, and she said, "Don't laugh so loud. That makes it mad." And when my Lego Knights attacked the GI Joes in a big Lego cart, I had them yelling like this: ah. And Jenny said, shh, I don't hear you. I didn't want to let the monster boss us around when I couldn't even see it. So when Jenny went to the washroom, I snuck downstairs. The smell was so bad. I held my nose and I held my G.I. Joe in the other hand. This one had a broken leg, so I didn't care if he got hurt. At the bottom of the stairs, there was this green slime all over everything, but it wasn't moving. I figured the monster left slime all over, like a slug. So I said, hello, Mr. Slime Monster? Are you there? I didn't hear anything. So I took the G.I. Joe and used him to scoop up a little of the slime. Then there was this big sucking sound. All the slime in the whole downstairs piled up and started to move. So I ran back upstairs and I said, it's moving. Jenny was out of the washroom by then, and she said, oh God, what did you do? It's gonna hurt us. And then the slime came all the way up the stairs, and Jenny said, run. She yelled it really loud, so I ran out the door, even though all my other G.I. Joes and Lego guys were still in there. I ran all the way home, and then I put the G.I. Joe with the slime on it in the Ziploc bag, because I knew you guys would want to see. I started to miss having my other G.I. Joes, so I went back to Jenny's house. Nobody answered the doorbell. It looked like there was nobody inside, just green slime covering up all the windows. I guess she's still there. That's why she's not in class. I bet she pretended to be scared of the slime monster so she could chase me off and take my toys. But I know better. I know it's really Slime Monster Defender Man, and it protects her. And then, as the third story in this group, I'm going to read a more recent story. This one appeared in Strange Horizons a couple of years ago, and it is called Across the Ice. I fasten my skates. The ritual soothes me. Dozens of eyelets, all pulled tight. Fasten my breathing mask, cool against the skin of my face. Hoist my daily pack over coat-padded shoulders. Then I push off, out through the airlock, out from the research center's squat silver bulk, into wide, white space. My fingers twitch, a curl of joy traveling from peace to thumbs. I force them still for a moment, out of long habit, before letting myself go. Europa's black sky stretches out over me, lit by glittering stars and a long red curve of Jupiter. Cold wind whips at me, muffled by the breathing mask and safety hood. This moon appears lumpy and wrinkled from space, full of tectonic ice falls and treacherous canyons. But between them, new, smooth ice fields stretch like this one. Plenty of space to skate, to spin and jump in whatever direction one chooses. Behind me is the research center, a square building, neatly labeled with our research team's name. Everything straight and strict. And in its clutches, rising half a mile high, is an ice blue pyramid, the massive, ancient alien structure that we came here to investigate. Before me, an ice-lined path stretches out, as straight and level as the research center, leading back to the dormitories. I'm skating home for the night. I have something new to tell Sharmila, something that fills my very bones with the urge to leap, dance, spin. On Earth, my teachers always told me not to spin. Sit straight, eyes on me, quiet hands. Even when the effort of it filled me to bursting, a trapped desire pounding so loud that it drowned out the lesson. Sharmila says, it isn't like that here. Out here, they only care if you're useful. They don't care if two women like you and me love each other, and they don't care if you move and think a little differently. I've never been sure if that's true, or if it's only what Sharmila believes. It's truthfully fewer people holler insults at us as we pass. When I flap my arms in the middle of my work, sometimes no one says anything. Out here, I've only gotten those familiar, scornful looks once or twice that I've noticed, at least. But moving the way I do is not useful. That's what the teachers always said. When I am calibrating instruments or running deconvolution on our seismic processing data, I sometimes forget myself and start to flap my hands, to hum. I just get so excited thinking about what we're studying. Real aliens who were once right here. The silver-haired woman who supervises me never says anything about it. She does not slap my hands or take away my tablet, but I still feel ashamed. I stop myself, still my hands, trying to work the way other people work. But out here on the ice, I do not stop. That is the deal that I made with myself. Alone with Sharmila, or alone out here, I can move whatever way I like. When the research base is out of sight, I jump. In Europa's low gravity, a chained athlete can rotate 5, 6, 7 times in the air. I can sometimes manage 2. I take off from my back inside edge and land almost clean, wobbling a little. I try a second time and lose my balance. My rear end thumps against the ice. Falling is not so bad here. I pick myself up, my pack undamaged. There is no one to herd me away, to say, slow down, Mila. This kind of skating isn't for you. This isn't the place to be silly. Let's just get you home. Here's what I want to tell Sharmila. Today, we finished scanning the inside of the pyramid. We finished interpreting our data into a visualized 3-dimensional map of what lies within. All the hollowed out rooms and corridors, though we don't dare go into them, not yet. My supervisor waved her arms and called everyone over. We had pictured long, straight halls like our own, no wasted movement. That was what we all assumed an advanced alien culture would be like. But what we saw, when the app finished rendering, was a looping labyrinth. Curves everywhere, curves and branches and circles, round open areas with spirals carved into the floors. Spirals, like when I'm spinning wildly, out of control, the spins of sheer exhilaration that only Sharmila ever sees. The aliens moved like me. I am not an alien. My body, with its tan skin, flat nails, dark eyes, and heavy curves, is as human as they come. But if aliens moved like me, then it is all right to move like me. They still came to this moon with technology we can scarcely imagine, built structures that should have been impossible. They moved like me and were more advanced than we are, not less. It means Sharmila was right all along. It means everything. I glide along the ice, following the flat and straight route home, until the tallest greenhouses rise over the small horizon. Sharmila is here, in her own thick, insulating coat and breathing mask, waiting for me by the greenhouse door. Seeing her sends a burst of joy rising from my toes to the tips of my fingers. My hands raised, flapping like wings. I want to throw my arms around her and tell her everything. Normally, in this final leg of the journey, I'd tamp that response back down, mindful of who from the barracks might be watching. No flapping, no wriggling, no spinning, no stimming, until I was safe in my quarters with no one but her. Today, I spur myself forward and let my body move on the way as it pleases. I step into position, fling out my arms, and spin, and spin, and spin. The end.
I love all 3 of those. I was hoping that Jenny's house would be included because I think it's just a great story. But let's start in the order that you read. The Professor in Disguise poem. I read the story notes after I finished the collection, as I think was the intention. And I had the same kind of conflict that you talk about in the story notes. Is that okay if I read that to just because you put it in words better than I can?
Mhm.
It says, I'm still not sure if this is a poem about being transported to another realm by a spellbinding professor or being bored to death by a bad one. I think I originally meant the latter, but so many readers have interpreted it as the former, and it honestly makes the poem more charming that way. And then for the readers who are not Canadian, a Timbit is a bite-sized baked good sold by Tim Hortons. It's common to bring a box of them in assorted flavors to a meeting or a small class. I miss college so much because of that feeling of being transported away by, being spoon-fed knowledge by brilliant people and just sitting there and letting it wash over you and the clock ceases to matter. And so this poem really captured that feeling for me. And it was really interesting when I was like, oh, but sometimes that clock slows down and it's this eternity locked in this classroom. So no, I love that poem.
I'm glad you love it. I'm a college professor myself now. I wasn't one when I
Yes.
first wrote that, so
Oh, interesting.
I hope I'm not boring my students
Right.
to death. We'll
You want to
see.
be you want to be the one rather than the other.
Yeah.
And then Jenny's house. I'm
Mhm.
going to scroll to the notes on this, but I love the child voice, which you then performed very, very well. But even on the page, that child voice is really clear, the very matter-of-fact way that Jenny discusses these things. And I wanted to ask where the idea for the slime monster came from. Was it a collision of ideas? Did it spring into your head fully formed? Where did this story come together? How did it work?
So I don't remember where like the slime monster came from specifically, like why it's a slime monster and not some other kind of monster. I don't remember that, but I do remember, and I think I mentioned this in the story notes, that the original kind of idea behind the story, which is kind of a sad idea, but I wanted to actually write a metaphor for domestic violence. And actually just for the idea that there's something in your house and you all know it's bad, but you're not quite dealing with it.
Yeah.
And until a crisis happens. So that's where that came from.
No, the very matter-of-fact way that Jenny's like, oh, that's the slime monster. Don't wake
Mm-hmm.
it up. It was very
Mm-hmm.
well done and very heartbreaking, of course, but a beautiful piece, especially the end where literally ironic, where the readers are going, oh, and the kid's like, no, she's fine.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's what happens sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And then the science fiction across the ice, I think that, autistic characters obviously show up throughout this piece and the collection in lots of different ways.
Mhm.
But this one is a little bit more explicit about the character exploring that on the page as opposed to it just being one attribute of the character.
Yeah,
And
this is one of the ones where it's really like about
yes,
autism.
about autism instead of just an autistic character. And I really loved, like, I found myself, even though I just read it, like writing quotes and
Mhm.
like the line before letting myself go, that release or that pent upness before. And then I think the most heartbreaking line is sometimes no one says anything, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that they're in a safer place or a more comfortable place, but still there's still obviously work to be done. Um, and then at the end, this idea of representation coming from an alien race and freeing them in themselves is such a neat idea to show how powerful representation can be.
That's really cool. I hadn't thought of it in terms of representation, but you're right, of course. I think that's one of the things that can get lost in our discussions of representation because it's so important to have actual autistic characters in
Yeah,
stories, and to have them be written in a clueful way and a respectful way. But we can also get representation from metaphors and from things that aren't literally an autistic person. And I've encountered so many autistic people who say, "Oh yeah, I don't like reading autistic characters actually, because they
huh.
get them wrong so often, or they're just not
Yeah,
like me." But I love, robots, and I love Mr. Spock, and I love Data, and because there can be something about a metaphorical representation where it portrays something that marginalized people relate to, kind of without going into the morass of like how marginalized people are actually viewed, if that makes sense. So some
yeah,
people really
yeah,
resonate with that more than they resonate with
sure.
explicit representation.
Right, like our fictional aliens are serving the
Yeah,
same role
exactly.
for this, that this
Yeah.
character
But then in
discovers.
Across the Ice, it's non-fictional aliens,
Yeah,
within the context of the story. It's like they were real. And gives it power on a whole other level.
enormous power,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. I think I'm going to ask you one more question since we have a little bit of time, and then we will say goodbye to celebrate this. And that is, what is the most read or most treasured book on your bookshelf? I always like to know what people get really excited about reading, or they reread a lot. I know it's such a hard question to ask
Of course,
writers.
now I'm overthinking and I'm like, what's on my bookshelf? What am I forgetting? Oh no. But
A read or a treasured.
I think the one in terms of most read, in terms of just how many times I read it, it is probably the Vorkosigan Saga by Lois McMaster Bujold. She was a huge influence on me, like, you know, from high school on. And she just does a lot in terms of, you know, it's space opera, but it's also super character driven, and there's diversity, and there's really important disabled characters, and I really enjoy that about her writing. And I think at one point someone used her as a comp title in a review of the Outside Books, and I was like, yay, that's my goals. But yes, okay.
Absolutely. That's the best feeling.
Yes.
Where can people find you online?
Okay, people can find me online. I have an official author website at adahoffmann.com, hyphen between Ada and Hoffmann. You can
With
find,
two N's.
Yes, two N's.
With
Very
two
important.
N's, yes.
You can also Google it because Google doesn't care how many N's there are.
Yes.
But there I have a bibliography of all the stuff I've ever published, so you can go and find all of that. I also have links to my Substack newsletter, which is called Everything is True. You can subscribe for that. You can subscribe to that for free and get all the, you know, updates on what I'm publishing and what I'm doing. Or there's also a paid version where you get like little essays as well. You can also find me on Blue Sky, and I believe I'm Ada Hoffmann on Blue Sky. I hope I'm Ada Hoffmann on Blue Sky. I'm functionally not on Twitter anymore. People still tag me there, and I'm like, yeah, sorry, no, but I am on Blue Sky. So that's where you can find me.
It's Ada Hoffmann with two N's on Blue Sky.
Okay, cool, cool.
Yeah. Awesome. And you can pre-order Resurrections now. It comes out in a couple of weeks on December 19th. You can go to www.apexbookcompany.com and it'll be right there on the front page for you to order it. Thank you so much for hanging out and talking to me about this collection, Ada. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for hosting me. It was great.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone who's watching now or in the somewhat nebulous future.